Welcome back again. So today I'm going to be talking with Pandu from Blocksphere in Indonesia. We've actually done a couple of interviews with her so far. She's essentially a big techie that operates in the Southeast Asian space, comes from the blockchain and crypto space from a technical viewpoint. And today we're going to be talking about how cryptocurrency and blockchain can assist with media censorship. And there's been a lot of that going on at the moment, and there's been a lot of talk about it, specifically in regards to various things that have been happening in the United States that I won't touch on, but there's been quite a few events over the past little while that sort of have been either censored or people are fearful of it being censored, a number of different Twitter accounts being affected, and then we're going to just talk a bit about pretty much a bit of philosophy around that, and then how that sort of can fit into the blockchain space. So I hope you enjoy. Thanks so much. All right, well, now we're going to have a bit of a chat about something else which is sort of related to, I guess, the data discussion we just had in relation to the US election. We're basically going to be talking about social media censorship, which is another reasonably interesting issue. And there's, I guess, to tie it back into blockchain and crypto, there's quite a few projects that are looking to tackle this, which we can talk about throughout this as well. But yeah, Pandu, why don't we just get kicked off, and you can start on what your feelings are towards social media censorship that we're seeing a lot of at the moment, and especially in relation to the election. And one of the candidates is obviously a bit cranky that most of his posts are getting taken down, but we won't get into that too much. But yeah, let's just kick off.
So I'm not going to mention which of the candidates got censored, since we are not aiming to be political here, but I just have a question. Why are we allowing unelected tech company executives to decide which side of the political spectrum is correct, are saying the correct things, which one is wrong think and which one is right think? I don't think that's the way to do it. I think it's a bit creepy, in fact, that like the likes of Mark Zuckerberg and Jack Dorsey are deciding which people to censor. And my thoughts on it is, like, I've been thinking about this a lot. And after the elections in the US, a lot of people went to different new social media platforms. Parler got big, Gab got big. I think they got millions of users in just one day. But I think they will face the same problems once they get of a certain size. And I think those problems have to do with the way they handle their data, because they still want to monetize data. Like if you go to the Parler, the conservative social media platform.
Well, Parler is the more libertarian Twitter, isn't it?
It is more libertarian, yes, but the way the media is speaking about it is, if it's a conservative social media platform, it's more libertarian. But
that actually brings up an interesting point, though, is that I mean, by classifying something, you have to then ask yourself why more conservative people. And by the way, I'm fairly politically neutral, so I'm just saying this hypothetically. But it's interesting that it's considered to be the conservative Twitter, because you would assume that, like when we look at data sets, it's like why would conservatives be leaving traditional social media for an alternative, if the alternative is working? Like that would generally, for example, if you have a look at historically the way that ancient man used to run around the earth, like no one used to live in settlements, and the reason why was because they'd use up enough of a certain area, and then they'd have to move on to greener pastures to stay alive. And if there was a situation where they could stay in one spot forever, they probably would have. And so obviously the environment changed or something changed, and then they had to move on. So it's interesting that, these new social media platforms, and even the ones in our industry in the blockchain, might be considered to be more conservative heavy. And I'd probably say that the main reason why is because of of this exact topic that we're talking about
Actually,
happening
I
in the
actually
traditional way?
have
Or?
I have a hypothesis, and it has to do with like free speech. Um, like when we were young, like we were younger, I guess we're still young. Liberals were the ones for free speech, but now conservatives seem to be the ones that are more for free speech. And I think it's just a trend. I don't think it means anything that has to do like with I think it's just a trend of the moment. That a lot of the things that are categorized as hate speech are 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 framed as being conservative and speaking about LGBT in a certain way, LGBT people in a certain way, or having opinions about family or marriage and those things have become something that you cannot say in society and you cannot say in social media as well. And which is why people flock to the more politically incorrect platforms. I think that's how it started. But of course, now it's not just about that. It's also about how political censorship is is basically like they're censoring the president, for God's sake. They're censoring the press secretary when she's speaking on social media. They're putting a lot of warnings. You can't watch some of the videos that Trump shares. I think it's become a partisan thing, but it shouldn't, because like again, when we were young, liberals were the ones for free speech, and it's right there in the name, liberty, right? So it's a bit baffling to me now how everything has changed, and
I think
I don't
the,
know.
I mean, like, without getting political on that, but I think that the issue is more to do with, obviously, part of it has been probably a lack of foresight in regards to the tech companies, in regards to corporate culture. And I remember that when I did an accelerator program, I think it was back in 2017 or something, when I first started in the startup and crypto space. A guy said, one of the guys who was an advisor, he actually said, it's really important from the outset to consider your corporate culture, like what you want to foster as a corporate culture. Now, if you do not create one will be provided for you. And that's a really important point for not only a lot of businesses, but it also is a bit telling in maybe the way that a lot of these, very large tech companies have sort of, I'd probably say that because of the rapid rise that they've seen of not only market capitalization, but increasing staff numbers, like all these different things, they've basically lost a lot of the control of what their corporate culture should be from the start, because maybe you wouldn't have had time to think about it, because when you're just about to put on 100 new staff every 2 weeks, it makes it difficult. Now, one company that tries really well to do that is Google. Now, they've sort of worked really hard on their corporate culture, and they have entire things. And I think that a lot of the big tech companies do it as well, but then I think they sort of work on it, but I think that they're sort of working on it once one has already been made, and then all you're doing is just reinforcing the existing sort of, corporate culture. Now, that could be sort of part of the reason why you might have more people leaning in one political direction than another in an organization. And I mean, like, I'm speculating right now. I would
We're
probably
all
say,
speculating now.
that if you walked into, any of the big three tech companies with a "Make America Great Again" hat on, you wouldn't necessarily be seen as overly popular. That's not to say that there wouldn't be people doing it, but I think that would really be drawing a line in the sand between the average human being that worked at that place, and then
It would
these
be hate
people are.
speech. Like
I mean,
in some contexts. I mean,
technically,
even the
obviously,
hat.
wearing a hat isn't. I don't want to that's a fucking landmine, but I mean, technically speaking, I mean, something like that isn't necessarily hate speech, but I mean, but people would be obviously offended, and you know, people have their own internal biases that would be reinforced by
Yeah,
the
yeah,
people that they hang out with, and that happens on both sides of politics. For
yeah, sure.
example, and this can happen with things that aren't true. Like, you know, there's obviously a lot of, and I don't need to even point them out because I think they're so overly well known, that, you know, there's a certain, I guess, a certain social disdain that is had for people who put the hat on if you're in a
Mm.
blue state. And then I think it goes the other way. Like I imagine if you're a, you know, I mean, like, you know, you've got the whole liberal bloody snowflake tears kind of argument that comes from the other side.
Right.
So I think both sides do this. And I don't
Both
think that
sides do
and I don't think you can't say that one side is better than the other. I mean, it's
this.
essentially part of human nature. It's tribalism. But I think back to the point is that I think that, and yet again, I'm just speculating. I think the biggest issue is that you've got these massive organizations that have had a corporate culture driven by most of the employees, who probably most would have been like, you know, Stanford grads, top
Sure.
university computer science grads, and they would have been taking that, the values of that particular university that they came from, and then brought that into the corporate life in the way that they want to be treated. And I think that's where a lot of that
Yeah, I
comes out.
agree. Yeah, I agree. I actually wanted to talk about this in another way as well. The reason I mentioned Gab and Parlor and people moving there, and I said that it's the same problems are still going to happen in Gab and in Parlor, is because both of those social media companies are still centralized. At the end of the
Oh
day,
yeah,
when they
and
hit
eventually when the culture
the
gets,
number of users, uh, it's still going to be a lot of issues. There's still going to be centralized control over that amount of data. If you go through the terms and conditions of Parler, they say it outright. They are really out in the open about it, but they say it outright that your data would be owned by them to probably fix the site, probably do better stuff. There's no advertising yet, but your data still belongs to them.
yeah,
So
but
that would be the issue. Still, it's not going to change anything.
but
It's just going to cause.
that's the age old thing of, you know, if the product is free, you're the product.
That's true. That's true. Which is why probably the product shouldn't be free, or or maybe there needs to be other ways to monetize, or maybe it needs to be piggybacking on something else that monetizes. So I'm thinking social media is important enough these days for us to talk about politics in the same breath and talk about it affecting politics, right? So why are we if it's that important, why are we again allowing unelected people, unelected company execs to choose our politics for us?
Yeah, and it does make a big difference.
Insane.
I mean, there's something that, I mean, I got from a channel that I watch about Australian politics, and a big part of it is they talk about the Murdoch media, and which is obviously, you know, Rupert Murdoch, ex-Australian.
Murdoch. Yeah.
Obviously owns like 80% of print media in Australia,
Yeah.
and obviously is part of Fox and all that stuff. But the one thing that I guess that news organization is about is it's not about telling people what to think. It's about telling people what they should think about. So essentially, it's
That's
like framing the discussion in a certain way, and that's I think the power that obviously social media has. It's like information that isn't publicized essentially isn't known, and therefore goes completely ignored. Whereas, and like, you know,
social media shouldn't editorialize, which is the issue now, because when we started, like with MySpace, with Friendster, with Facebook, whatever, with the Facebook, they didn't editorialize. The algorithms just show us, like, especially Twitter, right? Like, you just go through your timeline, you see everything. But now they editorialize by basically either pushing stuff higher on your timeline, shadow banning people, so you don't get seen your posts because you're doing hate speech or you've been sharing misinformation, or basically putting warnings on everything you post. it becomes editorializing, which is, but it's a different kind of editorializing from like media, because media, it's editorializing because it says it's an editorial, right? Like it's an op-ed. But social media, you don't see that. You see an interaction with the rest of the world, but it's actually mediated reality because you don't see exactly what is being posted by every one of your friends. They are actually, like, especially Facebook, they are basically putting you inside your own little bubbles, like your conservative friends and then your other friends, and then like you have your own social media bubble. That's one of the issues. But the other issue as well is if they deem a certain thought unworthy of discussion, like what happened with Hunter Biden's laptops, which was an article in the New York Post, one of the oldest newspapers in the country, founded by Alexander Hamilton.
Yeah.
And that was censored in all the social media, like Facebook and Twitter deleted the article. You cannot share it. There's no preview even. I think it's insane that there's a level of editorializing that is so it's unlike editorials. Like you go to a newspaper, it's an editorial, and you know it is. If you go to social media and you see like there's no Hunter Biden reports anywhere, you don't see it as editorializing. You see it as just part of your reality. Part of your reality is, oh, the Hunter Biden laptop is Russian disinformation, and that's the only use. That's the only type of news you see.
But that's the issue when you have. That's the issue when you have a very strong human component when it comes into policy making. So obviously, it's fine if the organization has policies that are like, you can't post X, Y, Z, and here are the criteria of X, Y, Z. And anyone who is involved in law would know that's why legal documents are so wordy, because what they do is you'll make a statement, and then you then have to qualify what is each part of that statement and what does it mean. Like you can't, hypothetically, if it's like, you can't do hate speech, and then they'll have to go down and then determine by define what is hate speech? Like what are the components? What boxes do you need to check to be in violation of this protocol? Whereas if those things were being applied across everything, if they were being applied uniformly across all users, then I don't think anyone would really have a major problem. And the other issue is that I think the rules that they probably have, the policies that they have determined, are also incredibly complex. And the more complex you make policies, the easier it is to find loopholes, and then you end up sort of where we are now, where you can take down something that might actually not be that bad, but just because someone subjectively thinks that it is, even though it doesn't breach any policies, it can be seen as being bad. Which is why, and I'm just going to segue into something crypto related briefly, but this is why I really like outfits like Steam or Hive, depending on which side of that fracture you want to sit on. Personally, I would be more into Hive, but Hive essentially, Hive is, no one's Justin Sun, but it's like, it's one of those things where, you end up in it's still quite, it has the risk of being able to be centralized, because the more Steam tokens you own or Hive tokens you own, the more that you are able to influence what content is good and bad. So that is part of Hive. However, because the tokens are spread so far and wide across so many different users, you're generally getting, and this is where we talk about statistics, you would get a very smooth curve on what the average person sees as being good, bad, in the middle, whatever.
Sure.
And that's how you want it. You don't want it to be lumpy, because the more people and the more widely tokens are distributed, means that, you are less likely to get one person, who might be high up in Hive saying, no, I don't like that kind of stuff, delete. Whereas you would obviously in something like Hive, you would need, community consensus. But there are very, I'll just finish on one thing though, but different to the Twitters and the even the YouTubes, there are very clear guidelines on things that can't be posted. And so obviously anything that is in breach of these really simple rules, and it's like, it's pretty much the kind of stuff that would make sense to immediately ban. It's quite simple. And then obviously the community then shapes over time how the expectations may change as society does, because obviously the kind of things that we would talk about or even put on YouTube or whatever now would be entirely unacceptable, like say 50 years ago. And then half of that would still be unacceptable 50 years before that. So, so I think that it's important that we end up with a system like that changes, where the average community is able to, the bell curve of the community is able to shape the direction of, what is seen as being acceptable and not over time. But that's all I want to say about that part.
Yeah, I agree with most of what you said, but I do have issues with the way Hive and Steam do things. As in, like, it's better than Facebook. It's better than Twitter, in my opinion, because it's not like a purely centralized hierarchical structure with like Zuckerberg on the top. But it still has an issue because there is a potential for that centralization to emerge from the oligarchy of like the people in the community who actually have the more tokens, and like there's still that issue of centralization is an issue. But, I would like to actually talk about something that is decentralized but is not blockchain, Mastodon, which is another social media. Which within Mastodon you can create your own nodes just for the people in your social network, and you can define that social network based on whatever interests you have. Like if you want a small like Mastodon node just for like the people in Australia, for example, you can actually start that up. And I think that works more like how we interact in society, because the issue with the current social media platforms is, in my opinion, we're trying to make a society on top of a platform that is owned by people. And when we're actually talking to, like, when we're interacting now via Zoom, of course, but when we're interacting live and we have our friends network, it's not just based on a platform which mediates our reality and has rules for like, for interaction. Like we have our own rules of interaction that might be cultural, but it would be different. Like even Indonesia and Australia would be different, for example. And even like the crypto people in Indonesia, for example, compared to like the banking people in Indonesia, talk in a different way. Like we're degenerates, the crypto people, right? So what I'm saying is there should be different rules for different communities. Just like, so when we're not talking about decentralized social networks, I'm not talking about blockchain social networks, believe it or not. There might be elements of blockchain, but it might not be a crypto-based one. Like it.
But if you're setting up just devil's advocate again, but if you're setting up an individual, if you're setting up an individual node, and you're sort of saying that you only want to hear information from, people that share these same basically is it like, you're saying that I only want to hear from people that have these same things. Essentially, you're just creating your own bubble as opposed to having a whole bunch of data scientists create it for you.
That's true. That's true. My issue with the bubble is not that, like, we all live in bubbles. Like, you have your own bubble, you have your own social bubble, not just social media bubble. But the problem with the bubbles that I see in like Facebook and Twitter, it's almost designed. Like, it came into being because for example, Breitbart. If you are not friends with any conservative person, you wouldn't see Breitbart even on your Google search, and particularly not on your Facebook timeline, because Breitbart isn't shown. But me, I'm a conservative, so I see Breitbart all the time in my timeline, right? I think that's design. Now, if I were to start like a group for conservatives, then I would have conservatives. But I would probably generally start a group that is like, I'm not a politician. I'm not going to be talking about conservatism all day long. I would be talking about blockchain. I do a group about blockchain. People come in, and those are people outside of my bubble, out of my political bubble most of the time. And I think the issue with Facebook and Twitter, and this is a speculation, of course. You keep repeating speculation, correct? But I think that's how they monetize because they want interactions on top of their platform. And the way interactions happen is either you keep having circle jerks with people who agree with each other all the time, or get friction sometimes for
Mm.
several posts. And they do both of that. And I think that's by design. And again, that's speculation. And again, the only thing I can't prove it. And that's the point. I can't prove it because it's a centralized system and it's opaque to me. I can't see what's in it. What something I really liked, at least at the beginning, was Reddit. The way Reddit was formed was amazing because the subreddits all are shaped like this. They have their own masters within, like the moderators, right? But then, like, censorship happened there also. The Donald got basically deplatformed. They had to actually create another website, thedonald.win.
Mm.
The Donald's is subreddit, guys. If you guys don't know, but the it started really like exactly like I wanted a social media to be, but it still had a centralized component to it, which at the end of the day it became censorship. Now the issue, and I'm sorry, I'm harping on here, but the issue though, of course, would be criminality. Like,
Okay, so let's try to bring this back to a bit more of a technology and I guess a data sense. Is
sure.
I mean, you know, we've had a whole bunch of hearings recently where, you know, I think we talked about it recently, the Senate meeting with you know, Mark Zuckerberg and Jack Dorsey. And I actually I'm going to stop that again. I want to talk about Alex Jones because that's interesting.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, so just we'll just fuck.
Are you okay?
Just stop, yeah. So we'll just bring this back, I guess not entirely to technology, but I think that one example of, you know, this whole issue with being deplatformed and organizations having a say over what's right and wrong and blah, 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 would be quite controversial, but it's someone like Alex Jones. Now, for those of you who don't know Alex Jones, he was part of an organization called, God, I can't even remember now, to be honest. That's right, InfoWars. And he's a bit, I mean, back when he was on InfoWars, he's the, you know, they're turning the frogs gay guy. And so he got a bit, he's a fairly hardcore human being, big into conspiracy theories. Many would argue that he crossed the line one too many times. And I mean, I'll be honest, I mean, some of the shit he said is pretty insane. However, I guess the argument is at what point, if you're not sort of breaking any of the major cardinal sins or doing anything that's actually criminal on the internet, at what point is it appropriate to sort of deplatform somebody? And I know that, you know, Twitter, Facebook, all these different platforms, they're private organizations with shareholders and they can technically do whatever they want. They're not required by law to give someone air. But then that then leads us back into this problem of that, you know, something that's out there and that we all know that everybody is on. And essentially it's one of those things that, that maybe in 15 years we might consider to be a human right. To be like a basic human right might be that you get access to social media because that's how influential it is on many people's day-to-day lives. In many countries across the world, I mean, most people would, you know, the amount of hours spent on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, just to name a few, is a monumental piece of many people's day and a lot of businesses as well. So I guess the big thing, and I think it'll be interesting. I mean, obviously, I lean more politically neutral, whereas you're a bit to the right. But I think at what point do you think it is appropriate to, you know, as long as we're not breaking the law or break any cardinal sins, to actually kick somebody off? And then I think afterwards we can talk about the fact that, you know, all the major social media platforms did this in an deplatform this guy in an orchestrated way.
Okay, if you're asking me that, I don't think anyone should be deplatformed from like their social reality. So here's the thing. You're right about social media companies actually being private companies, and they can, like, they should be allowed to kick anyone out. So I actually agree with that from that perspective. But your one other thing you mentioned was it's become sort of almost a human right because it's the right of communication. Like it's the right to actually exist online, which is getting more and more important. Um, Deplatforming Alex Jones was bad because of the second thing, basically because you are actually not just deplatforming him, you are unpersoning him. It's like almost like he doesn't exist online. A lot of the videos that he put up, of course, he has his own website, but you have to go out of your way to actually go there. And I think right now, because of the structures that we have, the centralized structures again of these big tech enterprises, there's no way out. Like there's this clash between like, oh, private enterprises should be allowed to kick anyone out, and no, you cannot unperson a person.
Yeah.
And the only solution is if we actually have decentralized social networks, which are like gardens for us to like build our own social networks. Like, and I'm talking social networks, not in just digital social networks. Right now, we already have social networks. We have our network of friends, alumni network, whatever.
But the one thing I want to say is about that is if we end up in a decentralized way, I mean, obviously the benefits of decentralization is there's no central control, blah, blah, blah. But then the biggest issue with the decentralized network is then how the hell do we pay for it? And then how can you compete with a decentralized, for example, a decentralized product will generally, the revenue streams will not be as great as if you were a private company. And
Sure.
then it means that you would find it, a decentralized network would find it harder to innovate, would find it harder to update, and then actually stay competitive to the average user over a big company like, Facebook. So for example, Hive, for example, has like the UI is nothing on, Twitter or Instagram or even, their videos. If you compare the Hive Tube or whatever it's called, like the Hive equivalent of YouTube, compared as a UI compared to the just normal YouTube, it's like going back 10 years.
I have several ideas about this, but like it boils down into two things. One is what you incentivize is actually running the infrastructure itself. Like you might have incentivization, but in running the infrastructure, get the miners of the world to basically host, like it's like the Filecoin model for at least for storage purposes. You put stuff on top of a decentralized architecture, which is still like from the infrastructure perspective, you still have incentivization for people who are running the nodes. So you can still mine basically, but it doesn't affect everything that is on top of it. So there's a layer on top of it, which is the social layer, the social media layer, and it's not affected by anything below it. That's why I didn't like the Steam model. I still don't like the Steam model or the Hive model because the stuff on top of it can be affected by stuff on the bottom. Okay, so social and infrastructure are two different things. So the infrastructure people can compete. The infrastructure people can there might even come a time where the infrastructure people all are dominated by this one group or one country, for example, which is still fine if the social layer doesn't change. Now, from the social perspective, I think there should be still incentivization, but incentivization in a different way. So likes, for example, is incentivization. We can call it something like kudos or like whatever you call it. But it's basically something that you have a finite number of likes based on your reputation. Then you can give that like to other people and then give them the higher reputation. So, of course, this is not a system that cannot be gamed. It can still be gamed, but it would help you separate like the noise, the signal from the noise.
So obviously our time is a bit limited, so let's just go to one last question. So we've talked about, obviously from a philosophical standpoint, the big issue with social media and the influence that they have, that I guess when you have a centralized control mechanism, the content that we created. But it's something that I mentioned before, which is that do you think that eventually we're going to see something like access to social media and access to an online presence as becoming a basic human right, in the same way that even the internet is actually considered to be now by many in the West a basic human right. Like access to the internet is considered to be, because kids need it for education, people need it for work. Like you cannot really exist in a world easily without access to the internet. So being a basic human right. Do you think that we might actually see something like that happening with social media, so that something like what happened with our friend Alex Jones won't experience?
I think it's already happening, and I think it's bigger than that, because we're talking about our digital identities. We are talking about our social digital identities, but that boy Alex Jones probably can't get a PayPal account. I don't know. So it's becoming a human right. I think it's already a human right for most of the derivatives of the identity on your digital platforms.
Because I think that it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out as people need it, and hopefully we don't end up with a like a dystopian system like on Black Mirror with the I can't remember what they were called that they used, but I know that in a show that I watch as well called Community, they're called meow meow beans, and the higher your meow meow beans, the better your status, and you get access to nicer things. Hopefully we don't end up in that kind of world with a social score, but I think that access to be able to express what you think, whether it's good, bad, or whatever, and as long as it's not breaking any laws online, I'd consider that to be a basic human right. And I think that one of the biggest issues with, say, censorship is that you're basically having a very arrogant worldview when you think that you're smarter than everyone else and you can make a decision on what other people can and can't see. And that you just automatically think that people that, listen to, for example, Alex Jones, are just going to be like totally swayed and like believe everything that he says. Now, I mean, he has actually been right about a couple of his conspiracy theories. So, go figure. But I think that, I think that the issue is that someone who sits high up in a social media company cannot therefore assume that they're smarter than everyone else. And I think that's a mistake we often make as humans. It's like, I know that there was a statistic done with American drivers, and 93% of American drivers felt that they were above average drivers, which of course, as we know through statistics, is actually impossible. So generally it's a Dunning-Kruger effect, where you know nothing, but you assume that you know everything because I'm the smartest. And I think that actually we won't have time to get deep into it now, but I think that's one of the more interesting parts about how this censorship works, because what we're doing is we're giving control to, random people in companies who therefore decide the information that we're allowed to consume. And it's almost like, well, what makes you think that you're so smart that you have the right to do that? I mean, at least newspapers will decide whether they cover a story or not, and about whether it's interesting or whether it's going to sell ads or something. But I don't think there's ever a point where a newspaper will say, that they just won't necessarily, or they'll just like block someone from buying their newspaper, or writing an letter to the editor or something like that.
Right.
So I think that is the bigger issue, in that where that people are deciding what we can and can't read in a world where everybody has an opinion. And I think that's the really dangerous part of all this.
Yeah, I agree.
So any other closing statements before my laptop runs out of batteries?
I think we should define a roadmap for like how we want to define the future of how we socially interact online. And I think it shouldn't be centralized. I think it should be decentralized. It doesn't have to be fully blockchain. The decentralization focuses on how you make sure that no one overreaches their power. And that's it. That's what we need to do.
All right, sweet. Well, it's good to have you on again. Unfortunately, I've had to wrap this up fairly quickly because I'm sitting pretty low on battery life. But we'll no doubt catch up about something else, some other crazy topic in the near future.
Sure. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.